And hello everyone, welcome back to another C++ tutorial. So in this tutorial we'll be taking a look on how we can get SQL to run inside of C++ because sometimes you need to work with a database in C++. So all of the source code that we're going to talk about today can be found here. Link is in the description. So weebnetsu, YouTube projects. Go to C++, you'll notice you're free here. You just say MySQL connection, click on there, and here's the source code. Cool, now let's get that out of the way. Now take note, most of what I'm going to be talking about today will be focused on Linux and macOS like operating systems. This will work on Windows as well, but you'll need to do a little bit of extra tweaking in order to get this to work. In the source code, I left a little note for Windows users that someone left a comment on a video, on a previous video I made about this, saying how you could get this to run on Windows. However, I don't use Windows, so I have no idea how that works. Cool. Now let's clean up here, and here we go. Nice clean slate. So first of all, let's start off with first getting our database to be running. So in our case, we'll be using MariaDB. MariaDB is basically MySQL. That's all you need to know. It's the same as MySQL. So after you have installed it, if you're on Linux, you need to make sure you have started up this process. So just sudo systemctl start MariaDB. If you have MySQL, you of course have to say MySQL here. And then it will ask you for a password. And just like that, it should have been started up. If you go systemctl status MariaDB, and this is Linux only. If you're on Mac, you don't have to worry about this. Then you should see this active is active. Cool. Then of course to get into it, you can just say MariaDB and then your user and whatnot. Okay. Now I already have a bunch of databases and stuff in here, so I'm just going to say drop tbl users. And there we go. So now I don't have any more data here. Now let's get started. First off, we want to create a users table. And here we go. I just created it. It created a table. So just create table. We're just saying tbl users, give it an ID, name, surname, email, password. This is just a dummy database. You can find all of this code in the source code. And you can just paste it here. So depending on your operating system, you might have to install the MySQL or MariaDB development files. I believe all I had to do was just install MariaDB, and that installed the development files for me as well. But to find out where, if you have it, if you're on Linux, you can just go ls/usr/includes, and here you should have either a MariaDB or a MySQL. So let's see, do you have a MariaDB? No. Do you have a MySQL? Yes, I have a MySQL. Okay, then in here you'll find a bunch of things you can use, like mysql.h. This is what I'm looking for. This mysql.h. You need this header file for everything here to work. So make sure you have the SQL development files with this header file here. If you're on Windows or Mac, I think you should probably also get it. I don't know how the Mac file system works, but it might also be in /usr include MySQL. Anyhow, so if you have that, then you're basically good to go. Now let's get started. We need to build out a few things. First, let's just include a few things here. So include tuple. This will allow us to use tuples. And then we also need to include the SQL header. So hashtag include MySQL. And then I need to say mysql.h. You might have something different here. I know in some, especially Debian-based operating systems or distros, you might have to say MariaDB/MySQL or MySQL/MariaDB. It depends all on this here. So mine is MySQL. That's this first part here, MySQL. And in that mysql.h we'll take a look at. And then we also need to include one more this is an optional header, but mysql.d error. It's so we can handle errors. Once we have that, we have all we need to be included. Next up, we can create a struct. And this can hold all of our SQL connection information. So SQL connection. And here we can just have information, std string, such as the server we're connecting to, the user, the password, and the database we're trying to connect to. And for those of you that don't know, a struct is just a class, but I think by default everything is public instead of private in C++. And then you can create a constructor, so SQL connection, std string, and we can say server, and we're going to have to do this quite a lot, so I'm just going to copy the server, user, password, database. And then we can of course just do the regular this, and then server becomes the server we passed in. And we can do that for everything we passed in. Cool, now this is basically our connection. It's as simple as that. This will help us connect by just keeping all of this information stored for us. Now we need to do some SQL connection setup. So this will try and connect our database, or us to our database. To do that, we can create a function that will return a tuple, a boolean, and then a MySQL object pointer. So std tuple, and then it will return a boolean and a MySQL, all caps, and an asterisk to say it's a pointer, and an SQL connection setup. And we can take in a struct SQL connection MySQL details. Here we go. Now while we're here, let me also teach you about code documentation for those of you who have not yet jumped into that. Whenever you write in a code base, it's always a good idea to leave a lot of comments, but we already know the basics of comments. It's a good idea to hold comments everywhere, anywhere where you can, where it might be confusing, what not. In this case, what we are trying to do is we are trying to do code documentation. Luckily for me, VS Code already autocompletes a lot of this for me. So if I go /*, and this will autocomplete a lot of the code documentation for me. Add brief is like the description you're trying to give this function. For example, we'll try to connect to SQL. Return a tuple. First value will be true if connection was a success. And now anyone who reads this will understand immediately what this function does. And in here we could just leave a comment saying what this pair means. So details to connect to SQLDB. This is code documentation. Whenever I now hover over this function, it will show me this documentation. This is very useful, and I recommend everyone try and use this as much as possible in your code, because a lot of people will find this very, very helpful. Great, now that we also know how to do code documentation, let's continue with the rest of this course. So we can create a connection, MySQL is equal, or MySQL, and then a pointer connection is equal to MySQL init for initialize, and we can just specify null. And this will just create a MySQL instance for us. We can also create a boolean success in case there was an issue. This will then be false. You can then return std make tuple, and this will create a tuple for us with success and then the connection. Now let's put everything in the middle here that will try and connect to this database. We can then say if not MySQL real connect. So it's going to try and connect to MySQL with connection, so the connection we have, and we want to provide all of the details. So mysql details. So that's what's being put in right here, and this looks exactly the same as this here. So now we can just specify we want the server and in .c string, because here we cannot use an std string. However, we might want to do that. We need to use a C style string, which is a constant pointer. So we need to convert our std string to a C str. And we need to do this for not just the server, but the user, the password, and then the database. So Control C, VVV, database, password, and then we just need to pass in the port. If you don't have a specific port, then you can just say 0. And then the socket, I'm just going to say null because I do not have a socket. And then the client flag, I have no idea what this is, so I'm just going to put 0 there. And there we go. This is our SQL connection here. So it will try and connect this connection right here with these details we passed in. So the server, the user, the password, and the database. And then if it fails, because here we say if not, so if the connection is not going through, then we want to say success is equal to false. And we can maybe also just std.cout, and we can just cout connection error. And here we can say mysql underscore error, and we can just pass in the connection, because then we'll be able to read the error from that connection. And we can say std endl. Now you could exit the program here if you want, but in general usage, you do not want to ever exit a program just randomly. So you don't want to go exit and like 1. This here I did use in my previous tutorial, and you should never actually use that. So in this case, we're just going to return a failed success result in case it fails to connect. Okay, great. Now let's go here and try and do that connection. So bool success, and then we can just say mysql con for connection, and then mysql row, and this will be the rows we receive once we actually do the request. We can then create our struct SQL connection, SQL details, and we can say localhost, this is our host, and then our user, in my case I am Steve. Our password, I made it password because I don't need any really powerful password. Generally, you also don't want your password to just be in the code. You might want to instead have an environment variable file which you read this password from, and then you don't commit this to any like GitHub or anything like that. Because if someone else can go to that GitHub, if it's a public repository, and they can find out where your host is and what your password is, you're basically screwed. So generally, don't put your password in here directly, rather have a file that you read this password from or something like that. In this case, it's just an example, so it doesn't matter. And then our database. Now we can try and get the connection. So std tie, and this will try and create a tuple from a result. So success and then con. So this is the variables we created here. Make that equal to SQL connection setup, SQL details, and there we go. Now if we was not a success, so the connection just failed, we can just return. But in your case, what you have to do is you have to manage this. If something happens, you don't just return. You might want to display some extra messages or try to connect again, or maybe try different details or something like that. But because this here will just quit the program. In our case, it's just a basic example, we can just quit the program. Okay, now this is just the connection. Let's make sure everything works as expected. So there are two ways that you might have to go about to compile this. So let's go G++, and we just say main.cpp -o, and we just say output. So this will just create an output file, and you want to dash out to link USR include, and then if yours here, if you had to say MariaDB here, then you have to specify MariaDB. So I'll just make this a little bit longer. You just go here. Then you'd have to say MariaDB. If it's like me and you have to say MySQL, you can just say MySQL instead. And you just specify MySQL. This here is this .h file. So if this mysql.h is MariaDB.h, then you have to make sure this is MariaDB. You don't have to specify .h. Okay. Once this is there, you can just say -l. And this link is also two things that can happen. First is you can have MariaDB client. This might be one you'll have to use, but in my case, I just have to use MariaDB. I don't know really why it is like this. I just know it is like this. In the previous distro I tested this on, you needed to say MariaDB client. On this distro, aka Arch Linux, you have to say MariaDB. Don't know why, but that's what you have to do. Let's try and compile this. And here we're getting an error. Maybe you should just say, instead of normal return, we can just return 1, which I think means error. Compile this, it compiled. If we try and run this, it connected successfully. How would we know if it didn't connect successfully? We can just say that. There is no sieve user. So if I were to compile and run this, then here we get connection error. So right here, connection error. Access denied for user sieve at localhost using password yes. So the connection failed. That's basically what we got here. Okay, now that we have the connection underway, let us start with the SQL execution itself. So we can say auto here. I generally don't like using auto, but unless we want to write a ton of code here, auto is truly the best way to go. So I'm going to say auto here because I don't want to write a ton of code just to get this simple example out here. exec for execute SQL query. We can then take in a MySQL connection and then an std string, which will be a query. And yet again, you could add, if you want to, some documentation here. I'm going to skip that for now because we still have to go through the whole tutorial here, but you might want to do that. Okay, in our case, here is one way you could do it. You could return a tuple, which returns a success and then the connection. This is perfectly fine. However, some people would instead want to return an object, a struct, that says if it's a success and then it also returns the result. This is up to you which you prefer. I'm showing you both methods just so you can get an idea of what you can do here to make your life easier in the future. So here we can have struct and then result. So this is the result we want to return. Bool success. So if it was a success, to connect, mysql underscore res, which means result, and then res. There we go. This is what we'll be returning. Now let's create a variable, success, which will be by default true. And in here we can just say return result, success, and then mysql use result. So once an SQL query has given a result, we can just pass in our connection here because that will give us the result from the connection. And in here we can actually try and execute SQL queries. So we'll return this result here, which will return if it was a success and also the result of our query. We can then say if MySQL query connection query.cstring, because we need to convert it to a C type string. So this will try and execute this query. If this returns true, that means an error has occurred. So if this MySQL query function returns a true value, an error has occurred. However, if it returns a false value, then no error has occurred. So this will actually execute the SQL query for us. If an error has occurred, we can just say cout mysql query error colon, and we can just specify mysql error, and we can specify connection, and then we can just say success equal false, and then here we return the result if there is one, and then if it's a success. Now let's try and execute some SQL queries. So here I'm yet again going to use auto because I don't want to type out everything every time. Result is equal to exec SQL query. We can specify, or we can pass in the connection, and then what we want to do. In this case, select star from TBL users, and we add a semicolon, and there we go. So we pass in the connection, and then the string we want to execute, the SQL query. We can then say if not result.success. This time we can specify .success, and I love this method. It's a lot of extra typing you have to do, but I love this method because you specify if result was a success. In this case, if it was not a success, you can just return, but in your case, you might want to handle a few errors here. In my case, I just want to return. Otherwise, if no issue had happened, we can just say cout database output, and just another backslash in here just to give it an extra lengthy way before it's the full output. And we can use a while loop to go through each and every row inside of our SQL output. So while, and we just say row, and that becomes equal to mysql fetch row. It's almost like a for loop where each value becomes a value, and then result dot res, and this res comes from here. This is the res. If that is not equal to null, so while this row result we get here is not null, so while row is not null, this here is just like a one-liner, so we don't have to create this variable then check against this variable. What you could do is you could say while true, and you can assign this row inside of this while loop and then just break whenever it's null. But I like doing this because it's a one-liner. And then we can just say cout, and I'm going to just copy and paste this directly from the script because this is a lot of typing, which I, to be honest, don't want to do. Okay, so we're just saying cout, and in the row we want to select, and this would be like the first column, so row at column 0. And here we're just adding a pipe symbol, row at column 1, pipe, row at column 2, and you'll see the output of this in a second. Then we need to clean up the database result. So mysql free result, and result.res. So this will clean up this variable so it doesn't have all of these results in it anymore. And then you want to close the connection once we're done working with MySQL. So MySQL close, and then just con, and that will close the connection. Let's try and run this and see what our output is. Here we go. We do get a nice output. There we go. One Mike Wazowski, mike@gmail.com, password. This is the details we entered previously, so all of their actual details are now being displayed. What you could do is you could create a class that when you pass in this row, it will automatically structure it for you. So then you can just say row.mike or row.name or row.surname instead of having to say row at index 0, which can be confusing. But that's a little bit out of scope of this very long tutorial. Let's say we got an error. Let's say we said select from TBL users instead of star from TBL users. If we run this, then we get an MySQL error. You have an error in your SQL syntax. So it does throw a nice error for us if it is not correct. And that's the basics of getting SQL details or running SQL in C++. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you all again in the next C++ tutorial.